Good afternoon and welcome to our session on our study programmes, study exchange that can be funded by the Erasmus and Turing schemes. My name is Conleth Burns and I am a Global Opportunities Officer within the Global Opportunities team. It's great to see so many people coming along today to today's session. I'll go through just the agenda. So what we'll do today is we'll have a review of kind of the 21-22 placements and look towards 22-23. We'll talk about how Erasmus has been affected by COVID. We'll look at the process for Erasmus and Turing funding for outward study mobility, including the likes of the criteria, the funding, and then the links as well that students can go to. There'll be a bit of further information about points of contact and where you can access information, and then we'll open it up to questions at the end. We had hoped to have a student coming along to talk about their experience, but unfortunately that hasn't happened. But hopefully the information that I provide during today's session will give you the kind of the starting point for starting your Erasmus or Turing journey. If anybody has any questions, you can pop them into the chat on the screen. We'll try and get to them as quick as we can, but we'll also kind of pause at the end for further questions. So before I get into the actual Erasmus and Turing scheme, just a little bit about our team, the Global Opportunities team. We're based in the Student Guidance Centre, although with everything going on at the minute, we're still for most of our time, we're still working from home. There's a team of 6 of us, and we look after the kind of the inward and outward mobility. My role is outward mobility, and that includes the likes of the Erasmus Programme, but also programs like Study USA and Washington Ireland and the JET programme. And we kind of provide signposting to a lot of programs, and in some cases we administer programs as well. We also look after Go Global Week, which ran in October there. We'll be having a kind of a mini Go Global fair coming up in February time next year. And also we have some drop-in sessions. If anybody wants to ask any questions about what they can do or what's open to them, we have drop-in sessions which are advertised on My Future, and you can book on to if you wish. So in relation to European exchanges in 22-23, a lot of you may be aware that the Erasmus Programme, which has been a programme that has been established for years and Queens have participated in, is coming to an end, and we'll be allowed to run or to use the Erasmus Programme for study exchanges up until the end of May 2023. So there will be the framework in place to allow for exchanges to happen up until the 31st of May 2023. After that, we'll still hope to have all the links with our partners, but it will be through a different scheme. It'll be through, most likely it'll be through Turing, the Turing scheme, which is the UK's kind of equivalent to the Erasmus Programme. Any non-Erasmus exchanges that are outside of Erasmus agreements, they can be potentially funded through the Turing scheme for next academic year. So any Erasmus exchanges in 22-23 will be funded through the Erasmus scheme, and anything outside of Erasmus can potentially be funded through the Turing scheme. However, your school will need to have a valid agreement, a bilateral agreement with any universities, both within Erasmus or within the Turing scheme as well. As I mentioned, the current links with schools are expected to be valid for next academic year, and most of our partners who we've gone out to ask if they're willing to keep going from 22-23 and onwards have been very, very positive. And the current application process is still in place, and I'll get on to our application process a little bit later on in the presentation. However, your school may have their own application process. So I'll get on a little bit later to the Erasmus program directors in each school, and it's worth contacting them in the first instance if you're looking to undertake an Erasmus placement and they'll let you know what their application process is. So how have exchanges been affected by COVID? I suppose the last couple of academic years have been affected by COVID. In 1920, it's kind of started to have an effect. 2021, we saw a dip in the amount of students that we could send out, obviously for safety reasons. This academic year, we've been able to send out a lot of students, and we've been monitoring the situation throughout the academic year, and we'll continue to monitor that as well. We have put in place a risk assessment for every student going out on an international opportunity, whether that was study or work or whatever it was. Those students who had to complete their risk assessments, and then they were assessed on whether or not their travel was approved. I will get on to the risk assessments a little bit later on in the presentation and kind of go over the requirements for the risk assessment. As that process is now in place, and you cannot travel until it's been approved by the university, we would advise students thinking about doing Erasmus or any of the global opportunities not to make any financial commitments before the university has approved that placement. And we don't want any students, maybe putting down deposits for the likes of accommodation or flights without having that approved in place first of all. So what is the criteria to take part? And I suppose I'm mainly talking here about the Erasmus programme because that is still the main programme that we have in place for 22-23. However, there will be some placements that will be administered or will receive funding from the Turing scheme as well. But it's mainly Erasmus that I'm going to cover in this session. So it's open to students of any nationality as long as you're registered in a full degree programme at Queen's. The actual period of study has to be a minimum of 3 months. For Erasmus, and the funding can go up to a maximum of 12 months. Most students will go out through Erasmus for either a semester or a full academic year. There are maybe some shorter study programs which can be funded through the Turing scheme, but it's worth checking them out with those ones out with your school or contacting us directly at goglobal@qub.ac.uk if you've got one that you're interested in. So in terms of study placements, your mobility must be to an eligible partner university that your school has a link with. And I'll put up the link later on in the presentation, which you can go to see all the links that your school has. Some schools have 30 or 40 links with Erasmus institutions all over Europe. Some will have less than that, but there is a good broad range. We have around about 200 partners in total that we have links with. So why should you do an exchange? Why would you think about doing an exchange? Well, I suppose first of all, some courses require you to undertake a period of exchange, and those are the courses that have a language built in, and you potentially have to spend a year in another country, either on a work or study program. But for those who, and there are benefits to that, but for those who maybe are considering an Erasmus program or Erasmus exchange, who don't have a placement as a requirement, the benefits are obvious. You're getting that cultural awareness of living in a new city and a new country and building up those language skills, and also seeing a new style of teaching that you may not be exposed to whilst at Queen's. Our Global Opportunities team is based within Careers, Employability and Skills. So we would deal with a lot of employers. What is clear, what employers want to see is students who stand out and who make themselves different. So what better way to do that is by undertaking an Erasmus placement and spending a semester maybe in Hungary or a full academic year in Spain. On a CV that does look brilliant. A lot of these organisations nowadays have kind of hubs all across the world to be able to show a degree of flexibility that you didn't just come to Queen's and stay in Belfast for your degree. You went to another country to see a new style of teaching, to experience life in a new country. It shows that degree of flexibility, and in some cases that's what a lot of companies are looking for. A lot of students coming back from these experiences, talking to us, talk about how it's totally improved their resilience, having to get used to and making new friends, a new university, new accommodation, new language, new style of teaching. It helps to build up that resilience. It can be difficult at the start, but a lot of students say they have maybe a week of maybe being homesick, but then they get used to it, and it really helps them. It helps their confidence as well. So don't underestimate the life skills and the likes of going on a global opportunity can help you improve. And also the Degree Plus Award. If anybody's not familiar with the Degree Plus Award, it's an award Queen's provide for accrediting extracurricular activities that you do whilst at Queen's. And your Erasmus experience or your Turing funded experience can go towards the Degree Plus Award, as long as you're able to show that you've learned skills from doing it. And if you're going to be spending time in another country, then you're definitely building up some cultural awareness skills and language skills, and like the skills I mentioned before, resilience and confidence. It's those sort of skills that the Degree Plus Award is looking for. So in terms of your placement, it must be recognised as an integral part of your degree. So any modules that you take at your host university will replace the modules that we would have been taking at Queen's. So the duration of your degree isn't lengthened in any way due to your participation on the programme. Just the time that you spend at your host university will replace the time that you would have been spending at Queen's. And a record of your placement will appear on your Queen's transcript. Also, the mark that you get from the modules that you take in your host university may contribute towards your degree classification from Queen's. So when you're out there, the modules that you do may be converted when you return back to Queen's, and then obviously go towards your degree. So one of the big questions that students do have is, what is this all going to cost? So any students who spend a full year on a study placement don't pay any tuition fees at all. That's for a full year placement. You wouldn't pay any tuition fees at all. And that is agreed on a yearly basis. So it is in place for anybody who's currently out in 21-22. And we hope that it will be confirmed for 22-23. But it usually will be confirmed during the summer before placements start. So anybody going on a full year on a study placement won't pay any tuition fees, either to Queen's or to your host university. You wouldn't pay any tuition fees to your host university anyway, whether or not you're on a semester-long placement or a full year's placement. Now, we should say that that does only apply to students who normally pay NI, GB or EU fees. That fee waiver does not apply to students who pay international fees. So then students, like I mentioned, who spend part of the year or one semester on a study placement will pay the normal fees that they would normally pay if they had been at Queen's. And again, you don't pay any tuition fees to your host university. However, we have anecdotally heard from students that, during Welcome Week at their host university, there may be different courses that they may take up that charge their own fees themselves, but this isn't. These are not tuition fees; they're private courses. So, what other costs would be involved? Well, obviously, like if you're at Queen's, you would have to pay for accommodation and general living costs. We would stress that we don't organise accommodation for you. Whether it's going out on an Erasmus placement or really any global opportunity, it's up to you to organise your own accommodation. And we would advise doing that as early as possible. If you're thinking about undertaking an Erasmus placement, then when you're researching where you can go, you should be looking at accommodation as well and looking at the deadlines that they require. A lot of students that we find who are going out on study placements, the accommodation can be a kind of a stress point, trying to organise that before they go. So the earlier you do your research, the earlier you know about any deadlines that are coming up, or if your institution has accommodation. We're lucky in Queen's that we have on-campus accommodation. Not all institutions have accommodation. Not all institutions have accommodation so close to the main campus. So the earlier you do that research, the earlier you know where your accommodation is and if it's available, or if you're going to have to go with private accommodation, the less stress that it will cause you the summer before you potentially go out on placement. You'll still be able to receive your student loan in addition to the Erasmus grant, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. And you may be eligible for a supplementary loan because you're studying away from home. And what usually happens is when you're applying for your student loan, there is a section where you can tick that you are going to be studying on away or studying abroad, sorry. And your student loan company will send you out a course abroad form, which we can sign off in our office. And once you return that to your loan company, then you can potentially receive an extra supplement on your loan. So the Erasmus grant, I'm just going to talk about the Erasmus grant first, and then I'll touch on Turing as well. So the Erasmus grant isn't seen to cover everything. It's only meant to be a bit of a helping hand for when you're off. So I wouldn't be relying on the Erasmus grant that you receive to cover all your time when you're away. It's only seen to be a helping hand. So in terms of the rates that you will receive, countries are grouped into two groups based on the cost of living. So you can see there on the wee table that the likes of Denmark and Ireland and Luxembourg and Sweden, they're on group 1, and the other countries are in group 2 based on the cost of living in the country. So if you were going to, say, the likes of Denmark, you would receive, with a high cost of living, you would receive €420 per month of an Erasmus grant. If you were to go to the likes of Austria, you would receive €370 per month, as it has a lower cost of living. What we do is we calculate the duration that you would be spending at your host institution, and then calculate the total amount of Erasmus grant that you would receive. We then pay that in 2 installments. Once you arrive at your host institution, we will require some paperwork that is sent back to ourselves, and once you send back all that paperwork, we then pay you 70% of your total Erasmus grant. And the other 30% then you would receive the following, usually the following August, September. And like I say, just to stress that it's not meant to cover all your costs, it's only meant to be a helping hand. And it's also worth remembering that you won't receive that first initial 70% until you arrive in country. So you may have to pay some costs like flights and accommodation up front before you get that funding. There is a widening participation element to the Erasmus grant. So any students, what we do is we contact Student Finance here at Queen's, and we ask them if your household income falls below a certain threshold. And if that is the case, then your Erasmus grant, if you were going to, say, a group 1 country, will go from €420 per month up to €540 per month. And likewise for group 2, with a low cost of living, your Erasmus grant will go up from €370 per month to €490 per month if you're eligible for that widening participation element of the grant. I did put in the work rates because anybody got out on a work placement to a European country can also receive Erasmus funding, and they're quite similar costs of grant as well. So if you are undertaking a placement year that's part of your degree, and you're going to a European country, then it's worth contacting your placement office to ask them if you're eligible for an Erasmus grant. Now, in terms of Turing, the 22-23 rates will be determined probably next summer. We will put in a bid for funding at the start of next year, and we won't know how much funding we receive until the summer. Therefore, we won't know how much we'll be able to allocate to students until probably late next summer. There is a widening participation element of that as well. And also travel expenses can be covered also. But unfortunately, I can't give you the actual rates for 22-23. We'll not know them until later on next summer. So just as an example, I've put up here for a student going to, say, Germany for 8 months, the total Erasmus grant for their study exchange they will receive is €2,960. 70% of that they will receive after they start their placement and return all the required paperwork that we need. And then the second installment of that they will receive the following, usually the following August, September. If they qualify for the widened participation element of that, it would go up from 2,960 to 3,920 euros. Again, 70% of that would receive at the start of the placement, and the other 30% would be around August, September the following year. So after the question of where, how much does it cost, the big question for a lot of students is, where can I go? We have around about 200 links with different institutions all across Europe, and it's different for each school. So the best thing to do is to go on to www.qub.ac.uk/Erasmus, and the link to the faculty, the 3 different faculties, will be there. My colleague has just popped the link into the chat that takes you directly to the faculty list. So once you click into your faculty, you'll see your subject in each of the PDFs that are there, and also the Erasmus Programme Director for your school. So apart from ourselves and the Global Opportunities team, who administer the Erasmus grant and look after the nominations to the host institutions, another point of contact is your Erasmus Programme Director. Each school has an Erasmus Programme Director, and they look after the academic side of the programme. So they will be able to answer all your questions about what modules that I can study, are the modules at my host institutions correct. You will have to complete a learning agreement as part of your placement, which means that you will have to select modules at your host institution, and it would be your Erasmus Programme Director who would sign these off. Because remember that the modules that you take at your host institution will replace the modules that you would be missing at Queen's. They will also be able to advise if you are if you're able to go out on an Erasmus placement. There are some courses that don't allow it because of maybe you have to take essential modules in certain parts of the year. So it would be, we would always advise contacting your Erasmus Programme Director in the first instance to ask if you would be eligible to go out on an Erasmus study placement. So in terms of the Erasmus timeline, what we would advise now is looking at the Erasmus website. There's a lot of information up there, and a lot of it is very good information, and it tells you kind of a bit about the program. But obviously the links that I mentioned are there also. We would advise researching where you would like to go, and looking at the city, looking at the university, looking at the like I said before, the accommodation situation at that host institution. Also, if you're potentially registered with Disability Services here at Queen's, looking to see if your host institution has a similar type of support available at their institution, and if that support can be put in place. So the more research you do, the less stress it will cause you later on in the year. We would then ask you to contact your Erasmus Programme Director. Like I mentioned, the details of who that is in the link that's just in the chat. The submission or the deadline that we have in our team for applications to come to us is the 1st of March 2022. Now what happens is that we provide the application forms to your Erasmus Programme Director, and you would fill out the application form in conjunction with your Erasmus Programme Director, who would then submit them to us by the 1st of March 2022. However, your school may have deadlines earlier than that you need to indicate an interest or let them know where you want to go. So the earlier you get in touch with your Erasmus Programme Director to indicate that you're interested in going out on an Erasmus placement, the better. After we receive the applications, we'll nominate you to the host institution. Then usually around about the summertime, hosts will send out the likes of application forms and any requirements that they have. What we would always advise you to do is, once you know where you want to go, or once you've got an interest where you want to go, start researching the likes of accommodation, and look at if you require a visa. And I'll talk about visas a little bit later on. And also, you'll have to undertake the risk assessment as part of to get approval from the university before you go out on any international placement. In terms of the funding documentation, we usually send these out during the summer before you would go out, so that's next summer. And then we require some of those documents to be returned to us in order for us to release the first instalment of your Erasmus grant. So in terms of the risk assessment, as I mentioned, the university now requires all students undertaking a period of international work or study to undertake a risk assessment. We would advise that you don't travel before you've received this approval, and also that you wouldn't make any financial commitments before you receive the approval. For any students who are thinking about doing 2 placements, which some of the language students may choose to do, like a work placement and a study placement in the same country, you will require 2 risk assessments to be completed. So within the risk assessment, then there is a whole host of questions. And we want to just make sure that you are aware of any safety requirements for going away, the travel guidance that the Foreign and Commonwealth Office are providing for your host country, any visa requirements, and we want to make sure that you're aware of what you will require for a visa, an academic contingency plan. So we want to make sure that there is a plan in place that if your placement isn't able to go ahead, you have a fallback and that's agreed within your school. And then a host of other questions like where your nearest embassy or consulate is. Once your risk assessment is submitted, we will then contact your school for approval. And once that approval is received from your school and it's approved at a university level, you'll receive a confirmation email from ourselves. And then you would be free to go ahead and look at booking accommodation and booking flights, etc. Now, another thing that obviously has raised its head after Brexit is visas, and we get a lot of queries from students about visas. It is important to note that we are not visa experts, and we don't have the training to advise on visas. So we would advise that all queries about visas and immigration requirements for anybody who has a UK passport, UK citizens, should be directed to the relevant embassy or consulate here in the UK, and also your prospective host institution. UK nationals will be able to stay in the EU for no more than 90 days in any 180-day period and without a visa. However, on a study placement, it is very likely that you will be going over that 90 days. So you will require a visa to stay in your host country. The immigration rules for each of the 27 EU member states apply. So we would advise that you check the Foreign and Commonwealth Office the website for the most up-to-date advice. And that can be found in the passports and travel and the visas and residency sections of the living in guides on their website. We would advise students that to be aware that some countries require an in-person application to be made, and we're thinking of the likes of France and Scotland. You have to make an in-person application in one of their centres in Scotland or England, and you may be required to attend an interview or biometric testing as part of that application process. So the earlier you look at what their visa requirements are, the more informed you will be and the less stress it'll take out of the process. There also may be a requirement for you to submit supporting documents which are translated in the language of your host country. So again, the earlier you look at what's required, the earlier you'll know, or you'll be able to act on that as well. You should be aware that if you were to leave your host country, even temporarily, it might affect your immigration status and the ability to return to your host country. So it's worth checking those details out before you leave your host country. You should also check your passport and make sure that it remains valid for the time that you're travelling within the EU and for the duration of your stay. And also some countries do require your passport to be valid for a certain period of time after your stay. So it's worth checking that out as well on the Foreign and Commonwealth Office website. Any non-EU or non-UK passport holders may also require a visa, and therefore we would advise that you refer to your relevant embassy or consulate here in the UK for details on that. Any holders of an Irish or other EU passport can continue to move freely within the European Union. So, in terms of preparation for if you're wanting to go on an Erasmus study placement, we would advise that you research where you would like to go, now, and think about it, and contact your Erasmus Programme Director in a timely manner. As I mentioned before, your school may have an application process. Our deadline is the 1st of March to receive the application from your Erasmus Programme Director, but your school may have a process with themselves. Be proactive about accommodation, and then about your learning agreement. The learning agreement, as I mentioned before, contains the modules that you will study at your host institution. But accommodation and visas are two things that you should act on and research as early as possible. Check your university website and country information. As I mentioned before, look at your university, look at where it's located, look if it has halls of residence, look if you're required to look into private accommodation, check if it has the support services in place that you were similar to what you receive here at Queen's, and do all that research early because it'll help you in the long run. Consider any visa or immigration issues well in advance, and if you do require a visa, make sure you apply for that well in advance of you traveling. And also speak to former students who have been out to your host university. You can find who these are through your Erasmus Programme Director, or potentially we can put you in touch with previous participants. As I mentioned before, when it comes to the risk assessment, we would advise you don't make any financial commitments, and that could be the likes of flights or visas or accommodation, until your placement has been approved by the university, or until you've submitted your risk assessment and your approval has been made. Then you're free to make to book your flights and visas and accommodation. If it is the case that you can't wait and you have to put down a deposit, we would always advise that you check the small print and any cancellation policies that are in place for anything that you book. Whilst you are on placement, we would always ask that you maintain contact with Queen's, especially with your school, and be aware of any return dates that you have for Queen's, especially students going out on one semester placement. If you're going out potentially in the first semester of 22-23, you will have to be back at Queen's for second semester. And we've found in the past that a lot of European institutions, their semester dates run on into January and into February, and have assessment at that point. Now, there's never been any problems in the past. Students have contacted once they get out there, students have contacted their host university and asked them to do assessment before Christmas, so that they can return to Queen's in early January, and that's never been a problem. But it's just always be aware of when you need to return to Queen's. In order for you to receive your Erasmus grant or Turing grant in a timely manner, we ask that you return any documentation to ourselves as soon as possible and within our deadlines. Also, in relation to documentation, if your host university is sending you out an application form or an application form for accommodation, please adhere to their deadlines also, and make sure you apply or submit anything they require before their deadline. And we would always advise, if you do submit any coursework to your whilst you're on placement, that you keep copies of that. Now, we are quite lucky in Queen's that on campus we have got the Language Centre based in the Macleay Library. And they offer a whole range of language courses, both short and long, and a range of different languages. So we would advise that if you're thinking of doing an Erasmus placement and you're unfamiliar with the language of the country that you're going to, check out the Language Centre and check to see if they've got a course that you may be able to do before you go out to your host country, just to help you get by in those first few weeks. And it's a brilliant resource that we have. So you may as well use it. And then you can find out further information, as I mentioned before, on our website, qub.ac.uk/Erasmus. There is a huge amount of information there, but a lot of it is relevant, and so it's worth checking it out. Erasmusplus.org.uk also has loads of information. And if you want to read some blogs from students who have been out on Erasmus placements or placements to other international opportunities, definitely go on to globalgraduates.com and also our own website, go.qub.ac.uk/goglobal, and you'll be able to read some of those blogs. So if you're looking for further information, you can obviously email us at erasmus@qub.ac.uk. We are working from home currently, so it's probably best to email us in the first instance to find out more information. If it is about the academic side of the programme, we would probably advise contacting the Erasmus Programme Director, and for details of who that is, you can find on our website. You can also email goglobal@qub.ac.uk, which kind of goes through to our office as well. So just to let you know about a few other sessions that we have coming up, both this year and into next semester. Anybody interested in the Washington Ireland programme, fantastic opportunity. And we've got a session, an information session on the 24th of November, coming up for that. We have study exchange to a couple of institutions in Canada and an institution in Australia that run each year. If you're interested in undertaking a study exchange with one of those institutions, we have an information session coming up on the 1st of December. If you're interested in going to the US and undertaking a placement in the US and finding out how you can get a J1 visa, Rian Immigrant Centre will be on campus. Sorry, it won't be on campus, it'll be a virtual session taking place on the 9th of December, and you'll get to find out more information about that. If you're interested in undertaking a summer camp, Camp Counselors USA will be present for a session on the 25th of January next year. And we'll be doing a session ourselves focusing on summer and the opportunities that you can undertake during the summer. That session will be taking place on the 23rd of March. All these sessions are currently online. Will be taking place virtually. If you're looking to sign up to any of them, you can go through My Future, or you can look at our careers events page, which is just, my colleague Rory has just popped up in the chat there, and that link will take you directly to sign up for any one of those programs. What I haven't mentioned there is that we will, and I mentioned at the outset of the session, we will be undertaking a Go Global mini fair in around about February time next year. And that will take place, hopefully, in person in the Student Guidance Centre, or maybe actually in Elmwood Hall, which is beside the Student Guidance Centre. And it'll be a chance to find out more information about a range of different programmes from students who have been there and done that. So keep an eye out for that coming up on My Future and on our social media channels as well. We advertise all of these sessions heavily on social media and also on My Future. We also have a drop-in service that runs every Tuesday and Thursday from 12 to 1. These are 15-minute appointments through MS Teams. And we don't mind if students are coming to us with a blank page and wondering where they would like to go, or if you've got interest in a certain programme. We are happy enough to talk to you about that programme or the criteria, or give you further details. So that virtual drop-in service runs every Tuesday and Thursday from 12 to 1. And you can book those through My Future. So that's all I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to now open it up to questions in the chat. I've seen a couple of earlier questions from Yanting, which I just talked about now. You were asked if it's open to international students. The Erasmus programme is open to international students. Postgraduate taught, it is potentially open to postgraduate taught. However, it can be a little bit more difficult just to find the exchanges as opposed to an undergraduate student, because obviously if you're doing an under or postgraduate taught degree, you have to map the kind of the modules that you're studying onto modules at another European institution. So potentially it is possible, but I would just check with your Erasmus Programme Director if it's something that you should be considering. In relation to the visa, unfortunately, as I mentioned in the session, we can't advise on visas. We don't have the training. So I would probably advise contacting maybe international student support who will be able to advise maybe further on the visa, or potentially the relevant embassy or consulate here in the UK. Oh, it's the thing again. I didn't learn the target language. Is it a must? I am an international student speaking English, and so I think what you're getting at there is if you don't have the language of your host country. So really, we see that a lot of the links that we have are for institutions across Europe who teach in English. So you don't need to have the language of the host country. We would see those mainly in France and Spain and potentially Portugal as well, that anybody going out on those sort of exchanges may need to have the host language. But for most of the other links to other countries, the modules are taught in English. So I don't see any more questions coming through on the chat. I think I've answered those 2 questions. Folks, if you need any more information, like I mentioned before, you can go onto our website. It's got loads of information, www.qub.ac.uk/Erasmus. You can email us at erasmus@qub.ac.uk, and we will try and get back to you as quick as we can. I was going to say you can telephone us, but because we're working from home, I think email is the easiest. Or alternatively, you could potentially book on to one of those virtual drop-in sessions that I mentioned a couple of slides ago. This session is being recorded, and it'll be up on our events page probably towards the end of the week or maybe into early next week. You'll also be able to access it through the link that you followed to get here today. There will be a recording up later on in the week if you want to find or go back over the information. But I don't see any more questions coming up there, folks. So thanks very much for coming along today. I hope you found the session useful. Please don't hesitate to get in contact with us if you have any queries. And if you're interested in undertaking an Erasmus experience, it is a wonderful opportunity. But I would suggest getting contacting your Erasmus Programme Director to indicate your interest as soon as you can. And then once you know where you'd like to go, start researching your host institution and look at the likes of accommodation and look at the likes of visas that you may need and those sort of things. The sooner you get that done, the sooner you look into that, the less stress you will encounter maybe into the summer next year. So I'll leave you there. So thanks very much for coming along, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.